For everyone joining, this is the Gaming Playbook. This is my weekly podcast. This is the live edition. So today we're getting into something which is the most requested pretty much, which is how to get a job, specifically in the games industry. And I thought, who better than Christina? We had a chat about a month ago talking about this topic, and she's actually been through a layoff last year. And as of today, her company just been acquired. So she's gone from a contract recruiter to now a permanent recruiter. So I thought, what an amazing story to share. And then we can both go into actually practically what to do following a layoff, before a layoff, and then we have some time for Q&A at the end. So yeah, really excited to have everyone here. I'll quickly start with Christina, just giving a bit of a kind of recap, like who is Christina?
Yeah, so I am an industry recruiter. I've been a recruiter in HR for about a decade or so. I've been in games the last 5 years. I actually started in games doing contracts. I was actually really terrified of being laid off. And so I started doing contracts. I had a full-time job and I started taking small contracts, and then I was really good at it. My husband encouraged me to go full-time. I had kind of reached the peak of where I was in my previous role, decided, hey, what the heck, I'll go for it. And then I ended up landing a full-time role at Naughty Dog. So I was at Naughty Dog for the last 2 years, and then I was subject to Naughty Dog's layoffs in March. That's kind of where I think my layoff story starts.
Okay, so for everyone watching, we're going to get into that layoff story, practically what Christina did, and then we're just going to go A to Z, what we would do if we were in that situation. So, Christina, you were laid off. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, so actually my story goes a little bit before the layoffs. So I had just come back from maternity leave. I had just had my second baby. And I had come back to find out that while I was on maternity leave, part of my team had already been laid off. And so I kind of came back from that last quarter 4 of 2023, realizing like part of my team had been eliminated. There was some assurances, not guarantees, but they said, we feel comfortable with where we're at. We don't expect any more layoffs. A month after being back from maternity leave, my husband, who also works in games, he himself got laid off. So that was kind of step one. Was A, my team got eliminated, part of it, and then B, my husband. So we started kind of navigating and taking some of these preliminary steps, knowing that one of us had been laid off. We'll kind of talk about those steps a little bit later, but we kind of taken some preliminary steps. I felt confident. I had been given a ton of work. I was working on special projects. And then one of the announcements came that one of the games we've been working on kind of had been canceled. We thought that's okay. It makes sense that this game is canceled. It kind of doesn't really align with what Naughty Dog is working on, kind of being like a first party like narrative team. It makes sense. And then a month later, I woke up to news that Sony had let go of the London studio. They're like, hey, we're closing down the London studio. I thought, oh, that sucks. I was ready to make a LinkedIn post about it. I got to my workstation and realized that my workstation had been completely shut off. And me being an optimist, I thought, oh, you know what? It's probably unrelated. It's probably just like a weird IT thing. Thankfully, I have Slack and Outlook on my phone. I'll just ping the IT team. And that's when I opened my email to receive the email that said, hey, we are unfortunately subject to layoffs. You can expect an invitation from HR. And I was the first person to meet with HR that morning. A little frustrating because if I hadn't had Outlook on my phone, I would not have known that I had been laid off or when my actual meeting with HR was. So I think that the rollout was probably not ideal, but it's my understanding that it actually was kind of a shock to even like our direct manager. So my manager wasn't aware who was getting laid off. So I think it was pretty sudden for our studio, a little unexpected. And so, yeah, I was impacted there. And it was pretty devastating being like a leading industry voice on LinkedIn. I had really been an advocate of everything that Naughty Dog stood for. I still love the brand. My last name is Drake. And so I have a certain affinity for the Uncharted franchise, as I'm sure you can understand. In my interview, they asked me, why do you want to work at Naughty Dog? And I said, well, I want to work for the company that brought my family legacy to the forefront of pop culture. And they were like, that's a great answer. So still a big fan, still super supportive, but was pretty devastated knowing that I had just spent 2 years really like promoting this brand and helping so many candidates find roles either at Naughty Dog or in the Sony family. And that had kind of been like the rug pulled out from under me in one fell swoop that I was pretty unprepared for.
Yeah. No, and hearing what you said, I've noticed because a lot of US based studios have done that, like very sudden, very short notice layoff. And it seems like the most painful one because you don't have time to process. You're going into a HR meeting. And then even if you do have paid severance, just the emotional toll that happens, like it being so sudden. So I want to take this to the listener now because that likely resonates with some people watching. So that's happened. Next day, you said you did some prep. I'd love to know, what was the prep?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of two things. One, there's a couple of camps anybody could be in. One, a layoff is coming. You maybe have the inkling. For me, I ignored that feeling. I thought, oh, it's just my team, right? Oh, they assured us it's just the game. Our job should be okay. I kind of ignored that little voice in my head. The prep I did when my husband got laid off is really sitting down and looking at your finances and figuring out not just what you can cut, right, or what you can reduce, but what you can reduce that will still keep A, your quality of life, and B, make you happy. So I knew I have really bad OCD. Because of that, we do have like housekeepers that come every 2 weeks and kind of help like with the deep cleaning portion to keep my own brain at bay. I knew that that was something for my own mental health we needed to maintain. So we made cuts to other parts of our budget to continue to allocate for that need, right? So really looking at your personal budget and starting to reduce expenses where you can. We did a pretty significant budget restructure when my husband got laid off, keeping again like all the basic necessities, and we felt pretty confident. I mean, we were like, okay, we can definitely survive on this particular income, like having our income more than halved, right? We can survive with these modifications. So that's kind of part one. Part two is starting to, if you have enough advance notice, start squirreling away some savings. It could be $50, $100, $25, right? $5 a month, but start squirreling a little bit away because you won't know what the need is. In the past, I used to advise candidates to have at least 3 to 6 months of savings to kind of last through the duration of a typical job search. In games, especially right now, we're actually seeing that extended out 9, 10, 11 months, with 10 and a half being the national average in the US. So I would say, right, like if you can start squirreling away some of that income, absolutely do. There are things that I sacrificed that were nice to haves in my life. And then things that we definitely had to maintain. So the first piece I really think is like looking at the financial prep piece and what you can do there. Two, obviously some of the practical stuff, right? Make sure that you have a master resume. And I think we'll talk a little about that later. But having a master resume on file and being ready to accommodate that and start putting your ear to the ground and hearing like what's out there, what jobs are coming up, and who can you start to really buddy up with, or who can you start to be a little bit more proactive about maintaining a relationship with should you need to reach out when a layoff is kind of impending. So a little bit of that I would say is the initial prep work.
Yeah, I'd second all of that, especially the expenses side, like the breathing room, regardless of layoffs, of having 3 to 6 month expenses is worth it alone. But also knowing that, hey, okay, I have 5 months, let's go. Because then you can track the progress and decide, am I getting something part-time? Am I going to change industry in the meantime? What have you? But knowing what the runway is like step one for me. And I don't think there is a better first step. And to your point of the having the master resume before you need it, oh my God. Like I've done a lot of CV reviews, especially like last year in Christmas. I had a week where I wasn't that busy. So I did a post. I said, hey, doing free CV reviews. I did like 20. And some of them were like heads of development, for example. And I noticed most people do amazing things, but they don't have them on the CV. They just talk about the description. And the longer time passes between when you do it, when someone like me says, hey, what were the numbers? You said you've improved this process. Like, what was the numbers? It's like, oh, they struggle. And they sometimes, most of the time, they actually find it, which is nice. But what if you forgot? That's not coming back unless you go and dig in and try to find the numbers. So any numbers related to your performance, just put that on the CV. If your boss isn't doing performance reviews of any kind, then do it yourself. Just say, hey, by the way, last 3 months, I've done this. And you can have that as a bullet point in your CV. Because I've noticed when I'm selling a CV to someone, that's what they're looking at. Like the bullet points of like outcomes. And if you've done outcomes, please don't leave it to 2 years after doing the role to be like, oh, what were my outcomes? So like having that master resume, just treating it like I don't know, like an art piece. Like you just add to it.
Like a
and put it
portfolio.
together.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect.
So I tell people my master resume is like 14 or 15 pages long. And it includes every job I've ever had. So your master resume should literally be just a running list of every job you've had, every accomplishment. The template that I frequently pass around to people has a section at the top for key achievements and awards. And people ask me, like, what if I didn't get an award? And it's like, right. So list your key achievements. And what is a key achievement? A key achievement is something that I describe it. A key achievement is something you've done that nobody else would have noticed that you're proud of. And there are some really easy ways, right, to list that. So I give this example all the time. As a recruiter, I tell people my job, effectively, a big part of my job is reviewing resumes. So I could very easily say I'm a recruiter who reviews resumes. That's pretty boring. That's pretty standard. That's the expectation. But when I say something like I've reviewed over 56,000 resumes in a single year, that's significantly more impressive,
Is that
right?
true?
That is, yeah, that's true. That is a
Holy
fact.
shit.
Naughty dog.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. That's the
my
response I
reaction is
get.
like,
Yeah, yeah. And I'm pretty quick about it. And the other thing that I like, again, as a recruiter for me, one of the things that I prioritize is candidate communication. So I typically respond to all my LinkedIn messages, even if it's 2 or 3 weeks later, I eventually get to them. But I also do my best to respond to every single candidate. So it's easy for me to track because I'm like, okay, I reviewed 56,000 resumes. I know that I've sent out over X number of candidate communications. In my current role, I've already sent out almost 1,500 candidate communications
wow.
in like a little more than that, 7 weeks. So it's a lot. I do a lot of
That's
communication.
insane. For reference, like I did agency recruitment, and my project bank after 2.5 years, I think was around 500 to 1,000. It was very niche, but like the sheer volume you just described is insane. So
it's intense. And so that's the kind of thing, right? Like my bosses may not, especially like at City, like my boss may not have known that that's how many applications I've reviewed. But I knew that, and it was something that I was proud of. And I know that when I say that to another organization, that's really impressive. So I will say, like, your key achievements can be things that you have done that nobody else has noticed, but you're proud of. So just keep that in mind, because that's what's going to help sell you and really differentiate you against another candidate. So pro tip there, but keep a running master resume. And the reason I say that is because then like Harry said, you'll have a list of those key achievements of things you're proud of, things you've done, your metrics ongoing. And that's prep you can do at any point in time, regardless of the status of the industry. Just keep a running log. Do something you're proud of, like pop over to a Google Doc or pop over to your Word document and add it to your master resume. And then you don't have to think about it later when you're already stressed out because you've just been laid off. Then I just use that as a guide and I just pull those things as applicable for the jobs I'm applying to. So I have a couple versions of a resume. I have one that's like very HR focused because I have an HR background. So it's HR plus recruiting. I have one that's events plus recruiting, and I have one that's university plus recruiting, right? So it's easy to pull those things and extract them from that master document than to have to recraft, rehash, customize for 100, 150, 200, sometimes 1,000 applications. It's much easier to kind of bucket those and then apply accordingly for consistent skills that you've hopefully reverse engineer and know apply to that general demographic.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd second it. Like when I went solo in April, and before I went solo, I actually did applications. I actually got an offer to move to Texas to be a recruiter there. I nearly had a universe where I was in America being a recruiter. And when I think about how I got that job, the CV for that was different to other CVs because they wanted someone to come in and bring the UK way of doing business development. And for me, it was podcast. So in the CV, I definitely leaned on that quite a bit. I was like, look, I pioneered LinkedIn Live events. I've done X amount of podcasts, but it was a recruiter job. But I talked about all of that in the CV and then the presentation. When I think back, that is exactly what you said. I didn't get that as a report when it comes with my numbers. Like, oh, you pioneered this. Amazing. It's like, no, I had to think. I was like, oh, wait, that is relevant. Cool. Mm-hmm. And also it's the size of the company, because I also had a job offer for a recruitment company, which was one person, right? So when I sent my CV, for him, it was very much just like, how much have you generated? And can you do that here? So I was like, okay, here are the numbers. Here's what I think I can do in your industry. Boom, pure math. But in other places, it's more like, what ways of BD have you learned? Even if you weren't that successful, we want to know about it, because then you could bring that over. So I think having that CV tailored to, like you said, the types of role, also the size of studio, especially when it's like an employer's market now, like having that extra tailored thing is worth it. But it takes less time when you have that master CV, like you said, which I haven't actually thought of it like that before. So my CV is still only 2 pages. But now that I think about it, that's because I've cut a lot of stuff where I know some roles they might have actually appreciated. So I think I should actually have kept the long one and then have the short one like you did. So I love that tip.
Yep.
Fantastic. Okay. Let's get into, so we've talked a little bit about CVs. We could go on CVs for like 5 hours. I appreciate a lot of these topics we can. So I want to go high level on a few topics, and then we can go straight into Q&A and get a bit like down and dirty. So with a layoff, I've had this where I was at Gamescom and an artist came up to me and he said he's not sure if he should keep trying. He's at 8 months. He's got great work. Everyone says he has great work. He's gone through application process where the hiring manager said, we have great work, but we don't need a hair artist, for example. He was a concept artist in this case. And he was like, I don't know if I should keep going, like logistically. And then it was a question of like, okay, should I learn new skills or should I just keep applying? So I was curious, did this happen in your case? Did you have this thought, like, should I learn something new to get a different role or should I just keep going? Like, what do you think about that?
So I think there's a couple of layers to that. Number one, I think the biggest thing, people want to really dissect things into black and white. Yes or no, do I, don't I? People say, like, do I get into games? Well, maybe, right? Do I keep at games? Maybe. For me, I knew right away that post layoff, I didn't have the luxury of taking a lot of breathing room, right? Like I said, I had just had a baby not long before. I think my daughter was, she was born in May. So she was maybe just turned a year. I was having major surgery that I needed medical benefits for. My surgery was literally scheduled for, I think, like 5 days or something, 4 days post layoff. So I think for me, like, there was a lot of things that hinged on me being employed, especially when our family had already cut down to one income. So I knew that I didn't have a lot of breathing room. I started immediately trying to diversify income streams. You have to do one of two things, right? It's either you decrease your spending, which we'd already done, or you increase your income. So I knew I had to find a job of any kind. I needed to find some way to bring in income. To go back to your question of like whether or not you should stick it out and keep trying, for me, the answer was yes. And the way that I came to that is I kind of set myself up with some very realistic goals. I knew that we could survive on my severance package for approximately 3 months, assuming we didn't have anything happen, no tires popped, no leaks happened, right? Which feels like that always happens the second that you like don't need an emergency, it happens. I knew that I had approximately 3 months to invest in game roles specifically. I could survive for 3 months. I knew that after that 3-month mark, I had to diversify my search into tangential roles. So recruiting in other markets, things I've done in the past. So again, university recruiting, maybe finance. I've done a lot of entertainment. So I knew the next layer of that for me would be music. I've worked in the music industry in the past. So music industry, fashion industry, anything entertainment, TV, film would kind of be next. I had literally timed it out. Like I knew that I had 6 weeks that I could search for those particular roles before opening up further in my search. So then I was open to any recruiting role. After any recruiting role, I was open to any HR role. And I knew that by 6 months, I would take any job that I could get. It didn't matter if it was relevant or not. So really setting yourself up of like, what is your actual, again, like with your prep work, what is your actual runway time and how does that look for you? So it may be like, hey, I can look at games roles for 4 months. I could look at game roles for 4 days or 4 weeks, right? What does that actually look like before you start to diversify? And I think I've done a lot of talks about the side quest. I think there is no wrong way to side quest. I use this example a lot. I had a student who was a mentee of mine and she said, hey, I got laid off. I can't find another job. I don't know what to do. And I said, well, let's start looking at some tangential roles. Like, let's take your skills and apply them somewhere else. They ended up getting a job being a crime scene reconstructionist. And so they work for the court system and they now animate and rig like different like crime scenes. So car collisions, they're doing animation for like gunshot wounds and presenting that in court cases. And I'm like, even though it's a sidestep, it's not in games necessarily, you are making yourself a more diverse candidate for the stabilized market, because now you're not just an animator. Now you're doing rigging, you're doing vehicle collisions, so you're doing physics simulations, right? Like you now have an opportunity to do things that you've never done in the past because you took a side quest. So if anything, you're going to come back in the industry a little bit stronger than if you had just stayed in your role. Sure, you are sidestepping out of games for 3, 6, 9 months, a year, 18 months, 2 years. But when you come back, you're going to end up stronger. And I think there's no shame in that. So if you evaluate your runway, right, and you've started to really open up into those like pockets, you can find something that will give you transferable skills to pivot back. That's why I call it a side quest. Like you're not leaving for forever, right? You're not giving up on your dream. You're doing what you need to do now to survive and stay relevant. So do you up level your skills? Maybe. Like I didn't find that there was anything I needed to do to be a better recruiter or to be more attractive. The thing I needed to do was to stay relevant, give back to the community, something I've always done, and really continue to be a leading industry voice, and the job would come. And I think the other thing with that is like not being afraid to say no. There were a couple of positions that came up almost immediately that were significant pay cuts. And I knew that in taking those roles, it would eventually be misalignment. And this gets really in the weeds with like back end HR stuff, right? But it would be a significant misalignment for me and for the company. And ultimately I would be hurting my network, the company, right, by accepting that job out of desperation. When in reality, I knew that if I just held out a little bit longer, something that would be the perfect fit would come along. And I ended up finding that right around the 4-month mark, which is like unheard of in the industry right now.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of things to unpack there.
Yes.
Like the crime scene side quest booming, because I just envisioned her, if she wanted to come back to the industry, how cool is that to say in an interview? And I think a lot of people forget that a side quest isn't necessarily a compromise. Sometimes it could actually be a benefit. Like you said, it now establishes her as an artist, full stop, or as an animator, which then has all these tangential benefits. Interesting. So with your story, it makes sense in the sense of like you actually had months or weeks planned where you'd start expanding the search.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to talk to Kirsten here, who's said, this is literally a question about me, concept artist in that position. So I just want to come back to the person who's a concept artist, because I feel like art specifically, just to dedicate some time, are like the most hit. And I know this from speaking to some game studios, like a lot of them are just holding fire, even if they have needs, because they just want to see what happens. And when that's happening, even if they have money, it's like you could be the best artist in the world. It's just logistics. There might not be enough roles right now. So that point that you said of just getting a job in the meantime, I wonder if there's like it might be worth asking the chat a little bit, but like, what do you think is stopping people from actually doing what your mentee did, where just looking for an adjacent role? It's like, do you see any friction there?
I think there's a few things. One, people don't know where to look, right? They're like, hey, I got this job out of college. I've always been in the game space, or, you know, I used to do X, but now I've been in games for so long. You're seeing a lot of senior talent getting hit. Some people, right, have been like, hey, I got hired. Right. I was talking to someone last week and they said, hey, my first ever job was at X company. I've been here X number of years. I've never had to make a resume because they cherry picked me from university. So what do I do? So I think part of that is people don't know where to look. I think part of that is, yeah, absolutely. I think part of that is there's just an overwhelming sense of foreboding about the sheer quality and caliber of talent, right? We don't have a lot of roles open. So I tell people, like, I give this example too about production. At Naughty Dog, I had a production role. And in the past, I would get a few hundred applications, right? Over the course of a week, maybe 500, 600, 700. I opened a role at Naughty Dog and had over 1,000 applications the first 24 hours. Had to tell my hiring manager, like, hey, we're taking this off the website because I can't in good faith review more than 1,000 of these to give you the top 5 candidates to interview. So we're seeing that across the board. We're seeing that in recruiting. We're seeing that in biz dev. We're seeing that in HR. We're seeing that in art, right? We're seeing that in a lot of roles. So knowing where to look, or I think is probably a big hurdle. And I think the answer is it doesn't have to be concept art now, right? it can be something else, and you can dedicate your personal time to concept art, improving your portfolio. Del Walker put out an incredible like course about like eyebrow, like how to draw eyebrows and be very expressive with character eyebrows. So you can still be doing that personal development piece on your own time outside of work. Even myself, I posted about this. I ended up taking a role at a consignment shop. I took a role at a consignment shop, and I worked in consignment retail, minimum wage, contract job that was only 3 weeks long, but I knew that that would give me enough to be able to pay basic expenses between unemployment and what I needed for my family. So yes, I'm a leading industry voice who's working at a consignment shop. I have friends in rocket science who are waitressing, right? Like it's very different. And so I would say like, yes, art is brutal. It's hard to know where to look. I know someone who ended up getting a job with a sports league. So they now do the animatronics or like the graphics on the Jumbotron at sports events. I know people who've gone into fashion merchandising and done concept sketches for fashion. So really thinking critically about where could any of those skills possibly transfer and what does that look like coming back? I think people say like, if I leave entertainment, I can never come back. That may have been true 5 or 6 years ago, right? But that's not true now. Recruiters are very aware of what the industry is doing and the lasting effects it's going to have on our market. I can't guarantee that, yes, every recruiter will have a soft spot for this particular time period in the games. But I think enough of us, especially those of us that do have good big followings and are leading industry voices, we recognize the lasting impacts and hurt that these layoffs are having. And we're much more inclined to say, hey, we understand why there's a gap on your CV. We understand why you went from being a concept artist at a major AAA studio to doing graphics on a Jumbotron for the LA Kings, right? Like we kind of know why those things are happening and we can then champion on your behalf. You don't have to justify that to a hiring manager necessarily. If we can vouch for you, that's what's going to matter. And I think right now the majority of recruiters in our industry are recognizing the pain, the hurt, the frustration, the devastation, and the lasting impact that this is having. So I think that yes, a side quest is totally possible. If you don't know where to look, it's going to involve a little bit of creativity into kind of figuring out what that looks like. But I definitely think it's possible. Again, I think that there's 2 layers to it. So should you level up your skills? Yes, absolutely. Remain as relevant as possible. Can you leave the industry and come back and pivot? I can't guarantee that you'll come back, but I think that the chances are high. If you were my candidate, I would want to champion you, especially if you've worked in the industry, you've got the titles, you've got the credits. I don't see a reason why prolific talent would not be allowed to come back or not feel welcomed back or not be welcomed back by recruiters. But I definitely also understand the other piece of like, you still have to make a living, no one's going to fault you for me feeding my kids or keeping my house or right. So I think that there's multiple facets to whether or not a concept artist or an artist themselves should definitely, whatever you do, if you can put it in your portfolio to stay relevant, right? Like maintain your portfolio, don't be stagnant. I think that your ability to be resilient will demonstrate more prolific growth than someone who I think is maybe having a more negative perspective on LinkedIn and kind of sharing the I don't want to say like, be fake and like always be happy. It's not about that. But I think there's a fine line between feeling, and my posts are a prime example, right? I've gone through a lot of BS in the last 4 months and I'm pretty transparent about it on LinkedIn. But there's always some semblance of growth and resilience as opposed to just complaining. I always try to make it constructive. So you, in the way you present yourself and the way that you navigate some of these adversities is going to make you a stronger candidate overall, regardless of which direction you take it.
I couldn't agree more. And the point of the side quest can benefit when you come back. I want to address the message that came in the chat, which is a bit of just like a counter argument. It's like the risk of jumping industry is that when you come back as an artist, most, I'm guessing, account directors or want game focused experience. If you jump out of entertainment in general, I find it can hurt. Recruiters are open to cross industry, but it's when it gets to the leads and ADs that is the issue. They don't feel the same feelings on the subject. I wanted to just add a bit of 2 cents, and then Christina, I would love to hear yours. Yeah. So in my experience, it's a perception thing. So when I was placing, so my experience before doing business development for gaming CEOs is I did recruitment for the Nordics, mobile gaming studios, only Unity developers. I was on a team where I saw the artists as well. And this is all contract recruitment. A lot of the people that got hired were good, full stop. So let's take the assumption that we're good, which in this case means if I then jumped industry, would that harm my getting back into the industry? So in my argument is on LinkedIn, they can see what's been happening. So if you're a contract concept artist for a year after leaving a full-time position, as a recruiter, I'm just like, okay, cool. Let me dive deeper. But from perception, it doesn't look like you've left. But in essence, you might have been doing 1-2 hours a day relative to the 8 hours a day you were doing before. But let's just take the assumption that you were a contract recruiter. If you were doing a portfolio piece, let's say every month, every 2 weeks, some of them paid, some of them maybe unpaid, just to show momentum, I'd argue that you'd be in a very good position versus the person who didn't do that, because it really, really does show that momentum and you've stayed in the loop. Also, one point, if you're in this position where you either have to get a part-time job or you have more time on your hands, this is what I did to get my first client, which then allowed me to get 7 clients based on that one case study. So I now ghostwrite for 7 gaming CEOs. Naturally, I'd never ghostwritten for someone before the first one. So how do I get the first one? Well, I started coaching. And how did I start coaching? Well, the first 2 people I coached were for free. It was Ada Figueroa from King and someone who works in charity from BBC. I just said, hey, let me coach you for a month. I would just want feedback and a testimonial if I was good. Thank you. And then actually was like, oh crap, I actually have to do this now. So I had to build a whole curriculum, build the Notion, resources, and try to make it as frictionless as possible. And I learned a lot from doing that. And then with that testimonial, I then took that to someone who wanted paid coaching. And rather than say, hey, let me coach you, I said, hey, this is what coaching looks like. Here's an example, boom, boom, boom. Completely different conversation. I closed him. And now rest is history. I've leveraged that to get clients. Now, in the example of an artist, if you come to the interview or the CV or the portfolio and you say, hey, I have all this stuff that I've been doing, they don't need to know if it's paid or not. It just shows that you've been doing work. And doing work is better than not doing work in the eyes of the recruiter. So I just wanted to add that point that, yes, you've left the industry, but you don't have to leave the perception that you've just done no work in art for a year. Like that doesn't take the same 8 hours a day. So I just wanted to add that point. I think that was a little relevant.
I would say too, in terms of, JR, you asking like, whether or not our art directors or our leads have the same conflicted feelings. Hopefully not, right? Is it possible? Sure. But again, I think prior to this, absolutely. I think that stigma existed of like, oh, you left and came back, or you weren't good enough to stay. That's definitely perceptions that existed. That was prior to the last 2 years that we've seen. Every conversation I've had with a hiring manager and art director has been a lot more compassionate, a lot more empathetic, a lot more aware. My executives right now absolutely understand what's going on. They're in the industry news. They're seeing the news. They're seeing every single layoff that's happening. They're frequently asking me to reach out to layoff people and just establish connection and see if there's anything we can do for them. So I think that in terms of in the past stigmatization, sure. But I think going forward, we'll see that kind of reduced pretty significantly. And lean on your recruiter, right? If you've got great rapport with me during a pre-screen, ask me like, hey, is this important to your hiring manager? And if so, how can we better leverage me to answer that question as to, hey, I saw that you took a contract at a consignment shop for 3 weeks. What happened there? I told them I was working my butt off. I was doing one-on-one resume reviews independently during my 4 months to maintain income, but I had to feed my family, and part of that was joining this consignment shop. So again, kind of diversifying your income or even your skill set and maintaining that sense of like leveling up or continuing to work. If your portfolio stays stagnant and you took a side quest, maybe you're like, hey, the only job I could get because I happen to work on my car on the weekends is like working part-time for an automotive shop, right? Cool, that's fine. Is that inspiring you to create? Are you now creating like vehicle concepts? And are you now more diverse there? Maybe you make this like really rad concept of a monster truck that's like with like really hairy, like it's like just covered in shag carpet, right? Like those kinds of things are things you can put in a portfolio that you're working on that show that you haven't stagnated. The big fear that art directors have is that you've remained stagnant. So finding ways to really showcase you haven't kind of like Harry was saying, right? Like it may not be 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. It might be contract work. It might be volunteering. It might be game jams. It might be personal projects, something to prove you're not being stagnant.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm wondering if we pivot into Q&A because we're getting some good
We get
questions.
so many. I know. I feel like I didn't touch it all. Let me just really quick give a couple minutes
Please.
here on some of the things I think will be beneficial if you faced a layoff. I did do an entire write-up on this, so you can follow my LinkedIn and kind of see. I tracked every day what I did. I'm more than happy at any point in time to go into more depth on those. Like shoot me a message and we can chat about it. Effectively, every day, honestly, taking time to breathe and time to be yourself. For me, that meant like walking my dogs in the sunshine and just taking a 15 minutes a day to like ground myself and my mental health is really important. And then doing a lot of the administrative practical things. You can only apply to so many resumes per day before you're staring at the screen blankly going, what am I doing? Right? There's only so many jobs open per day, right? You can't just like machine gun 1,000 jobs and then feel like you're making progress. It might feel good in the moment, but it's not actually benefiting you long term. So again, I would spend part of my day being my own boss. I would say, okay, Christina, as your own CEO, today I need you to fill out, or reach out to 10, 15 connections, start to make this number of many phone calls, start your one-on-one appointments. So really start to think about like, what can you do in the meantime, breaking up your work day because unemployment is still work. If you're someone who doesn't have the luxury of taking a break, again, I know many people who said, hey, I needed a month to grieve before I could even jump into the hiring process. If you're one of those people, fine. Pick up on my tips after you've taken that break that you need. I didn't have that luxury. I jumped right in. So resume, obviously, number one, finding qualified jobs that you feel like you are a good fit for, spending some quality time applying to them, leveraging your network and seeing what's available, doing all the administrative prep. So filling out any documentation you need for unemployment, assistance, any kind of offboarding, anything like that, right? So really doing that. But again, I have a whole breakdown on LinkedIn about like what I did for the 2 weeks that I was unemployed, or the first 2 weeks of unemployment, to really kind of help set that framework. So given that I did promise to give some of those tips today, I feel like I've checked that box.
Nice.
But I would definitely say, touching on that. Okay, Q&A. Harry,
I want
hit me
to
with what
say
we've got.
one thing before the Q&A
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it might answer a few questions. So the thing I remember you said, as a recruiter, you had a production role, 1,000 applicants in a day, you then turned it off. So I'm just thinking, if I'm actually going out there applying for roles, it sounds like speed is very relevant right now. Very relevant. So actually having a system to have the job boards that you check, whether it's like twice a day, once a day. I'm just thinking about this from like a sales perspective. You need that master resume ready and then like a gun to be like, okay, doosh, doosh, doosh. All these jobs just opened up. We have Amira's job board, which I think is pretty good. Like, I don't know if that's conclusive. I haven't used it as a job seeker, but job boards like that, if you have that as an exercise and remember speed could get me the job, I think that's number one. And to take it one step further, as a recruiter, I was in charge of finding people who hire Unity developers and then saying, hey, hire this contractor. Naturally, if I waited until they posted a job, I would not make any money because I had to place a contractor, which is like the interim solution before they managed to find the full-time hire. What I'm getting at is I had a lot of relationships monthly with hiring managers. I had like 20 monthly calls with all the hiring managers in the Nordics, catching up like, hey, let's chat about the podcast. Hey, I have this new Unity developer who's just finished from Tokkabocker. Do you want to have a look? They say, actually, yeah, we actually need that in 2 months' time. Great, let's have the chat. Now, if I'm a candidate now, I've had given this advice to someone who's actually used it, so this isn't woo-woo, is build relationships with people who either hire for you or know people who hire. So practically what to do. Amir has a coaching spreadsheet. Not enough people do this, so this isn't going to be like a negative thing, but go to anyone in your niche and just send a very nice message saying, hey, I would love to do an informational interview because of XYZ. I'd love to just talk about my career and it would really help me. This would help whether you're from an intern or in the future, just speak to someone who's currently working because then you're actually going to know what are people looking for right now. And also they have friends who might know jobs. jobs before they actually go public. That's what they tend to do. And this is just a first step. Like, at least I saw this with recruiters, is the first thing a studio does before they hire someone is they ask, who do we know? This makes sense because they don't want to onboard someone who then leaves. So how do we eliminate that risk a little bit? They go for someone that someone trusts already. It's just the facts. It's not nice because that limits the pool, but the fact that that happens, I just want to say, it doesn't mean you've worked with that person for 20 years. It might just be someone that someone knows from an e-coffee or that someone's met at a conference. So you want to get into that little pool. And I'd find doing that, you can either go to conferences or have e-coffees with people in the industry or post on LinkedIn, like all three, which is what I do for BD. That I've noticed is just a good ROI. I guess you'd call that networking. I'm not saying replace your entire strategy, but
I will also say, I want to piggyback on that. If you are someone who's reaching out, right, to kind of establish some of those baseline connections, if you're asking for informational interviews, if you're asking for those types of things, two things. One, don't ask your recruiter for that. I just don't have time. I feel really guilty every single time I have to tell someone who spent the time to message me like, hey, Christina, I love your content. I really love what your vibe is. I would love to connect over coffee, or I would love to do a virtual, just 15 minutes, right? Just 15 minutes. I have 60,000 followers. Just 15 minutes is like an entire year's worth of work, right? I just don't have 15 minutes to spend on every individual.
It's better to get it from a hiring manager who have more time. I actually had a question from someone who was like looking for people to mentor.
Right? Or industry pros. Like, a lot of times my hiring managers don't have that time, right? But one of my engineers might, right?
Yeah,
one of my engineers might be able to do that.
Yes, of course. 100%.
Yeah. So I always call it like parallel, like go parallel to your recruiter as opposed to vertically. So I would say start parallel, because then what'll happen is the more and more you connect with parallels, then all of a sudden your name will pop up, right? And then I'll say, hey, like, studio, I'm looking for this position. And they'll say, oh, you know what? I had a chat with Harry. I really clicked with him. I would love to have him on my team. Here's his info, right? Or they'll say to me, hey, I met this guy recently at this event. We talked for like 10 minutes. I think you should talk to him. And I will always take my team's suggestions or referrals, whether they're soft, we call them soft referrals, like soft referral over a blank like applicant.
Because it makes sense. Like, someone's already done the vibe check. This helps exactly. Me. So you want to be the guy who's already vibe checked.
Totally. And then someone I saw in the chat was asking about referrals. Referrals do help. Formal referrals help in that, again, right? It gets you what I call like a VIP ticket. Everyone wants to get into the dance club. Everybody wants to be in the studio, right? Everybody wants to get in the door. There's a line 1,000 candidates long, 500 candidates long, 15, 2,000, whatever. You have a referral, you get your VIP ticket, you get to come to the front of the line for me to look at you. So it means that, like, you'll get first consideration. It does not mean or guarantee you'll get an interview.
It's like you were the first applicant on a job posting. It
gets you like a cut the line pass. Yeah. You get a cut the line pass. Yeah. So I always tell people, like, referrals are great in that it does help you get to the front of the line, but it's no guarantee. You're still going to have to do the interview yourself. You're still going to have to go through that. So just know, like, yes, network or connect or do coffee or whatever that looks like start to establish yourself and make connections with others in the industry, so that when I ask people in my network, my SOI is like your sphere of influence. When I ask my SOI, who do you know, your name should come up. Because again, I don't have all the time to sit with every single one of you as much as I would love to. Like, I have a full-time job. I have to review those 56,000 resumes.
It's logistics.
Right? Yeah, but if I do ask, I want your name to come up. And the more it comes up, the more likely I am to give you a call back. One avenue to give you a call back.
Absolutely. I'm going to move to the age question now, because I want to just share a story, and it'd be great to hear your point, Christina. Before I do that, I remembered something. So if you're doing an informational interview, the ultimate goal of that is to actually build the relationship, which means a follow-up call. So this is my hack. Let's say you book 15 minutes or 30 minutes. At the 14-minute mark, say, hey, we're coming close to time. Really appreciate your time. I've allocated my whole hour for this in case you had more time. Otherwise, this conversation has been great, but it would be great to continue. Most people will say yes, if they actually have the time, especially when you've done it for 15 minutes. What that does is they can get to know you as a person. And then you can say, hey, I'd love to implement everything you've said, and be great to share what happened in a month's time. Amazing. guess what? You now have a monthly call with someone who's going to be like a spy in a sense. And every mentor loves to have a Luke Skywalker because you give them all this advice, they go do it. I feel amazing. And also it validates whether the advice is good. So people want that sort of person who's actually going to implement and then report back in a sense. So if you gamify this, I found using something like Folk, it's a CRM that's free. You can like track, like, oh, I can have networking people. I've had e-coffees, I've had DM conversations, I have a monthly call. And then you can gamify that search, which I find, because finding a job doesn't feel like you've done anything until you've actually got the job. That's dangerous because then when you wake up, you're like, I'm a failure. But then if you've moved across the networking thing in the meantime, or you've applied for certain jobs, I find that just trying to get that recurring relationship, whether it's every 3 months, every month, game changer. I mean, that's what I did as a recruiter. It worked for that. So yeah, an idea.
Yep. And I use Trello for the same thing. I just literally made a Trello board and then just literally moved cards across for both my applications and for leads or calls that I was having when I was unemployed. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. So the age question, Kat, I think you asked about age. I think for me, it goes back to the same thing, Kat. It's not black or white. There are absolutely people who are going to look at that and pull some like informal age discrimination. The same thing happens because I'm a mom. The number one thing people told me was like, stop advertising that you're a mom on LinkedIn if you want a job. And I was like, I've literally created and founded Moms in Gaming. My kids are everywhere. They're my number one priority. They will never like triumph or take precedent. Like my job, my 9 to 5 is never going to replace my 5 to 9. So I'm absolutely not going to give up on the fact that I am a mom and being public about that. So I think like, yes, ageism can be a problem. There's a couple ways you can combat it, right? Number one, removing any indicator of age or graduation year on your resume. If you haven't graduated right now, if you're not a graduate of 2024 or expecting in 2025, I don't expect a graduation year on your resume for any education component. Two, cutting your resume down to 10 years of experience. It's great that you have 20 years experience. You can put that in a profile statement. You can talk about that in an interview. I would probably cut it to 10 years on your resume. It also keeps your resume from getting like multiple 4, 5, 6 pages long. So cutting to 10 years would be number 2. And then number 3, maintaining relevancy, right? Stagnancy. So if I see that you're using languages and you're a coder and you're using a lot of languages that haven't happened in the last, 5 or 10 years, I'm going to wonder if you stayed relevant. So I would say like, let's absolutely like work to position yourself in terms of relevancy. But I would say like, no, I don't think that you're unhireable, right? 15 years, Kat, is fine. Like 15 years is fine. I technically have been working in a HR capacity since I was 16, but I don't tell people that I've been doing that for like however old I am, right? I don't know. I can't do math. Sorry. I have other skills. So 15 years is fine, right? So I would say, no, you're not unhireable in your 40s. I'm not far away from 40, but most people don't know that. People are like, oh, you're like 25. And I'm like, no, I am not at all close to 25, but thank you. I have 2 little babies. So yeah, I would say like, yes, there will be at some level, at some point, probably some form of discrimination, but no, I would say for me, I don't think that makes you unhireable. In the state of California, there are actually like benefits and demographics that prove that like there are initiatives to hiring and maintaining some of our like more senior talent. And just from a national perspective in the US, this is the first time in US history that we've actually had 5 generations or 4 generations like in the workforce at the same time. So we have Gen Alpha entering the workforce. We have Gen Z in the workforce, right? We now have millennials in the workforce. We still have Gen X in the workforce. Now we have boomers in the workforce. Like our Gen Alpha is like, my niece is now 16. She's coming into, right, the workforce. So no, I would say like, again, it's not black and white. For me personally, I would not hold it against you. I don't see anything against hiring talent that is much more seasoned, especially in game dev, people who have that historical record keeping and knowledge, so long as they've maintained relevancy, have not remained stagnant.
Yep. I have a story here as well.
Yeah, so bring it.
I placed a Unity developer at King. This was in my first year, and he was 55. And the CV there was like, oh my God, he's worked on games since he was 1998. But he got a Unity game developer on a very new age type of game. Now, when I think back as to why he got the job, because it wasn't automatic, it was the showcase of the actual stuff he's done relative to the project. So when I take this to your example, senior UI UX, typically very hard to find a lot of the time, is that relevancy that Christina was talking about. I highlighted all of that for that Unity developer at the top. He had worked in C++ for like 10 years, but then he did 10 years of Unity. That C++ 30 years ago, I don't need that on the CV. So it's a perception thing from the hiring manager. If half of your CV is dedicated to stuff which is out of date, they might think you are half out of date. So it's just all of the things that you think the hiring manager would love to hear, like bingo, bingo, bingo. At least the whole first page needs to have that, especially with yours, which is visual. If you have visuals, then this is undeniable. Like, oh, here's my work. Here's my work. And also age, I could see as a benefit when it comes to retention. I have had hiring managers tell me, like, hey, we don't want someone who's going to leave in 6 months, 12 months. Can you like take that into account? Well, legally, they can't put that in the job description, right? Like, please stay. But like, I'm going to check for that when I'm presenting candidates because I want a happy customer. And the way to get a happy customer is to talk to people. What are your goals? If you're speaking to someone, I would make it clear, like, look, you're looking for your next home, I don't want to go anywhere. And the age could, in that case, actually be a benefit because it's actually likely for you to not want to jump around. So,
Kat, I was going to say, Kat, I actually know you, so I'll just touch one thing. For you, I definitely think that part of this has to do with just industry influx, right? We have very few UI UX roles on the market, and we have a significant number of people who've been laid off. We're seeing the same thing in recruiting. I think the latest statistics to come out are there's 144,000 recruiters unemployed right now. And when you narrow it down to the number of recruiting roles in games, last I saw there was 4, right? So that's a staggering statistic on like the number of, let's just say every single person applies. That means I would have a 1 in 144,000 chance of getting a job. So don't allow the current market conditions to dictate your value or your worth. And please don't try to assume or assign anything outside of flavor, right? Because a lot of this just comes down to flavor of a role. I have plenty of people who are qualified, talented, who could do a job. But like I've given this example a lot. And Harry, this might be lost on you because I don't know how frequently you guys have Taco Bell in the UK and Cyprus, but
I actually have a Taco Bell. The only one is in the Larnaca Mall, 10 minutes away from here. And also, I hate Taco Bell. I hate Taco Bell. It's the worst thing of all time.
Over.
I'm going to say it publicly. I don't like the way it makes you feel. My tummy hurts, and I think
that means you're probably not getting enough fiber in your day-to-day diet because Taco Bell statistically has the highest number of fiber per caloric intake of any fast food restaurant.
When I order a burrito every time,
I don't want to talk about it.
I just don't feel good. So
so that's fair, that's valid, but I am a Baja Blast. When I think about like who I am as a flavor, it is absolutely 100% Mountain Dew Baja Blast. So if I have a hiring manager who's really looking for a Diet Coke, nothing that I, Christina, do will make me a Diet Coke, right? I'm never going to be a dark soda. I'm always going to be a Baja Blast, and specifically a Mountain Dew Baja Blast, right? So no amount of me modifying a resume, changing my persona, dressing a particular way, having a different background is going to make me a Diet Coke, right? So what I need to do is start targeting my talent and targeting my focus into roles that really want a Baja Blast soda. And that's okay, but it doesn't mean that I as a person am less valuable because of my age, because of my gender. Could that be? Maybe. Maybe that's the reason my flavor profile is inaccurate, but I'm not going to put that blame on anybody else knowing that the market is so competitive. So I will just say for the most part, right, be mindful that like 10 out of 10, you're probably a rock solid candidate. The pickings are slim. Like from an economic standpoint, economics piece, right? It's hard. Like we just don't have the number of roles, right? So that's a big part of it. And then again, the other piece is just flavor. So if you may not be that role, again, like I talked to multiple studios, I got very close to offers multiple times, but sometimes things just weren't the right fit. And I didn't feel comfortable changing my flavor to fit a role. And at the same time, I didn't expect them to change their offerings for my flavor. So just be mindful of that.
Yeah, for sure. And something that I just replied in the chat, like sometimes it's the title. Like when I was in contract recruitment, tech art was always super hard. But guess what?
Yeah.
What people call a tech artist is sometimes very close to what other titles is, just with a little bit of spice and flavor in it. So just look at those job descriptions of like tech artist, anything adjacent. It's like, wait a minute, I have 80% of these.
And I'll make
Interesting.
sure too, Harry, to share with you. I worked with a couple of people, Matt Barney and Tyvik, on a big listing of potential job titles with various flavors. I'll reshare that too, so that all of you
Amazing.
guys have it. Because I think that's a really good resource on like what does a muscle simulation specialist actually mean? Well, okay, it's different depending on. For some people, that's a character effects artist, right? What does that
Yeah.
look like? For some people, that's a physics and character artist. Some people, that's a tech artist. So I have a whole listing of that I can share with you guys. It's a pretty good resource to help you kind of navigate some of those nuances as well.
Yeah. 100%. Like when it came to me hiring for a Unity developer, so many times they actually wanted a technical artist that knows Unity, and the other way around. Sometimes they said, I want a Unity tech artist. Like, wait a minute, you just want a developer that can implement this. This is very different. So yeah, don't assume the job title is gospel. Like sometimes you just need to dig deeper. And also this is why having those calls with people currently working in the industry helps, gives you that context.
Yeah.
Great.
We have probably time for like one more maybe.
Yeah, one more question. Also, I just want to close off on like, please follow Christina. Just like for everyone who's come from my neck of the woods, just follow Christina. She posts great stuff and it's real in the sense that like she's documented that journey. So like, please follow Christina. And anything else that you'd want to pay attention to, it'd be good to know. Like women's in gaming, anything else that they should check out?
Yeah, so a couple of things. I absolutely 10 out of 10. I did, like I mentioned this, I founded Moms in Gaming. We're a Discord server. We do some pretty cool offline stuff. So if you are somebody who is a working mom, or if you know a working mom in the industry who's looking for a place to connect, you can go to momsingaming.com. The link is in my LinkedIn profile to join our Discord server. So I would say I would absolutely suggest, kind of connecting with me there. Also, again, follow me on LinkedIn. I do put out pretty consistent content. I like to believe it's pretty authentic. So all in all, I would say those are probably the number one and number two places to find me offline.
Amazing. Alrighty. Would you like to do one final question?
Yes.
Okay.
Pick your favorite.
I have one that Pranav has very patiently said a couple times, which is how to get a job in the game industry when you don't have gaming experience.
Get experience. And the question is like, how do you do that, right? How do I get experience? Start going to game jams. Start doing game jams. Start volunteering with. Literally, Kat just posted it, right? Kat posted it for me. Thank you, Kat. So start looking at game jams in your area, whether they're local, whether they're online. Start publishing your own self-content to itch.io. I also teach for both Indie Game Dev Academy and Laguna College of Art and Design. So look at Indie Game Dev Academy, right? Start signing up for their weekend boot camps, their session 2s, their session 3s, and really start getting your feet wet in the industry to start establishing that baseline. And also recognize, as much as it pains me to say this, like now may not be the best time for entry. We've talked a little bit about it on this call, but you are competing with massive number of highly qualified, specialized talent that does have a ton of experience. And one thing we are seeing is we're seeing a lot of top level talent applying for lower level roles, which is pushing the barrier of expectation entry a lot higher than we've seen in the past. So when I have seniors who are applying to mid-level roles, it makes my mid-levels apply to entry-level roles, and my entry-level roles are now being forced out. So just be patient. Really start, I would say, setting your sights on maybe 2025. I personally, again, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't speak for me, like my employers. This is just my perceptions. I'm not an economist, so I don't know exact predictions. I know in the US, there's a lot of political turmoil and economic conditions that could affect this particular suggestion. But my pitch so far has been Q2 of 2025. I start to see I predict there being a much larger uptick in kind of stabilization, be it indie studios who we're starting to see crop up, whether that is AA, whether that's mobile, whether that's streaming services who are starting to get into games. LinkedIn has a gaming component now, whether that's gamification in other industries. So we're seeing a lot of gyms starting to implement gamification components, right? So Orange Theory is a popular one that comes to mind. We're seeing them doing some really cool stuff with plugins to Spotify. So really looking at gamification in other industries might be a better launching point than trying to get into maybe your number one choice AAA studio right now. That would be my suggestion.
Yep, I love it. And also, you're in data. I've just looked at your profile, and I feel like with you, it's slightly maybe easier. But I would go back to my previous point, like speak to people actually working in data, because they will know. And they might just give you the honest answers like, bro, wait a year. Or they might say, actually, this is how I would get in. And if you have the goal of getting a job, imagine the goal of having a conversation with a data engineer at a gaming company. That's a lot more achievable. And that might actually give you information which you can actually then act upon.
I do appreciate that people have said that I have a very noticeable personal brand. We've actually just talked about this before backstage. Harry was saying that he was doing some research. And he was like, the number one thing that kept coming up about you is that you're a punk rock princess who loves Taco Bell. And I was like, accurate. Like that is 100% the vibe. Punk rock princess, mommy, Taco Bell recruiter. Those all fit. That all fits under the.
It's memorable. You don't want to be. It's like that Buzz Lightyear meme, right? Where it's like, I'm special, and it's just like 50,000 Buzz Lightyears. Like, as long as your differentiating factor isn't like liking a fast food restaurant, which is very, very bad for you, it is like you'd be fine.
It's the number one healthiest fast food restaurant statistically year over year, but it's okay. It's okay. It's fine. We can have some differing opinions and still be friends.
There you go. We can
we'll
agree.
We'll just never go out to dinner together, ever.
Not to Taco Bell, that's for sure. We can have some nice traditional Greek food. Then everyone has a good time.
I also don't eat meat, and I'm allergic to wheat, so I'm kind of like.
Halloumi,
I don't know
then.
if I can even eat Greek. Okay. I'm like, I don't even know what I would eat.
When in doubt, halloumi.
There you go. Perfect. Awesome.
Amazing. Alrighty. Christina, thank you so much for your time. I will stick around for 5 to 10 minutes, guys, for some Q&A, because I see some people saying personal brand stuff. But yeah, Christina, thank you so much.
Thank you. I actually don't know how to leave if you don't. I'm like, I actually don't know how to leave, so I
can make you leave by pressing the button, or you can just close the screen.
Thank you all so much. Thank you. And Harry, thank you again for having me. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, talk to you later. Bye.
Later. Bye-bye. Amazing. Hello, everyone. So I will keep my voice down a little bit because there are some people sleeping, but I see Katie saying I'm hungry. Thank you, Christina. Thank you. Yes. So once it kind of becomes just me and you being the listener, I can take some more questions when it comes to personal branding, recruitment, interviews, because there's a lot to cover in 1 hour. So I will stick around for a little bit for some questions and some from late night vibes. I'm your radio host, Harry Phokou. And as soon as I see a question, I will put it on the screen and get it going. And also, feedback. By the time you've seen this, if there's any feedback, more than happy to take it. Alrighty. Where are you streaming from? I'm streaming from Cyprus. So it's 11 p.m. here. And my pleasure, Patreon. Booming. I'm going to scroll through, see if I've missed any questions. Aha. Kristen, any tips for connecting without being able to attach a note to your connect request? I hate coming across as cold or just out to bump my connection count. Alrighty. So, Kristen, I actually have data on this. So for my CEO clients, the accept rate is anywhere from 30 to 40% on a blank connection. And sometimes it's lower with a personalized connection request. So what do we do with this information? I would try to network with people who are close to your network, parallel or one above. So if you were a senior engineer, senior engineers or tech directors, once they accept, like you said, you don't want to come across as cold. What I found very successful into get an outcome, which is like a call, I say, thank you for accepting my connection request. Have a wonderful day, smiley face. And then I stop talking. Sometimes that alone starts the conversation. Otherwise, the next day I say, hey, I'm Kristen. This is what I do. Love to chat, or how's that thing going? In this case, if you're looking for something, I always try to lean on complimenting something impressive they've done and just being quite upfront, like, would it be okay if I introduce something? Because would it be okay if I asked you a question? We're asking permission to ask a question. It's like super soft. So if the goal is to like get someone on a video call, that is how I would take it. Alrighty. Scrolling down for the next question. Booming, booming. Dylan Lee, have you watched an episode of One Piece? Never. I just have this here for branding. Wendy, what are your thoughts on the trimming down due to age on LinkedIn? It's easier to trim down the revenue, but I feel LinkedIn is supposed to be your total history. I'm in the camp of just keeping the full history, because if they really wanted to know your age, they can go and find your education, right? So I would have that as my answer. I would just front load all of it with actual work. So they have to click see more. That takes a lot of time. If someone's like going on your LinkedIn profile, click see more, scrolling all the way down. So just make sure the top 3 rows are like boom, 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 recent, magic. You don't want the oldest role to be visible. If you want to pack up, like make it bigger, you can have like promotions or like transitions within an individual role. If you've only been at 2 companies, for example, for like a long amount of time, but just look at your LinkedIn profile from a zoom out perspective, from like, okay, does this look like I've been out of the game? Yes, no. And definitely just have title, which is most relevant to today. Don't be afraid to change the title to make it more relevant. If you were actually doing tech art, just say you're a tech artist. This is my opinion. Don't sue me. But if they gave you a title which is underplaying what you did, just call yourself what you did. That's my argument. And then the 3 bullet points is the actual things you've done with numbers. So situation, the task, action, result, numbers along the way, which are impressive. 3 of those bullet points. That is the way I would do it. For production management roles, would you recommend to take the time to get certified in something like Scrum? Unfortunately, I have not recruited for production management. When I had seen people recruit for it, they pretty much only looked at the production experience and whether they used Scrum in that production experience. I'm not sure if they like looked for the actual certification. I'm guessing it won't hurt, so I can't tell you not to do it. So yeah, sorry I can't give you more answers there. JR Register. I found a lot of studios seem to open up in Cyprus. That is true. After the war, both wars actually, so the war in Ukraine and then the war in Israel, a lot of companies are moving over, and there's a bit of very nice tax incentive by the government, something like silly, about 1% to 2% tax, something crazy. So yeah, loads of studios. Do you have a crash course on personal branding, marketing pro, but can't market herself? Haha. Well, I've done an actual podcast on the topic. So step 1, I have a little newsletter. So if you scan that, you get the newsletter, which I try to give tips practically how to sign more clients on LinkedIn, which includes personal branding. So if you scan that, you get the next one. And then if you go to my podcast called The Gaming Playbook, not the episode today, but the episode before was Business Development Playbook. And in that, I pretty much explain exactly what I do, like A to Z. Otherwise, have a look at my content. And if you got any other questions, feel free to let me know. And I could give you a little, I can point you in the right direction or just give you some resources. Hope that helps. I'll leave that QR code in the top corner. We have people scanning. Amazing. So if I go to captions, bring down more questions. Am I using StreamYard? No, I'm using Restream. It's my favorite one at $20 a month. That is my favorite. Giancarlo. When it comes to metrics in resumes, any advice for someone like me with a writing and journalism background? I've never dealt directly with traffic numbers or anything like that, so I don't have easy numbers I can refer to. So you have numbers of posts, numbers of words, journalism background. Well, in my head, you have the places you wrote for have numbers. So you might have written for a insert impressive number type of website, newspaper, what have you. So leverage the numbers you do have, which you always have numbers. So either number of words, number of articles, or number of kind of like type of journalism you've written for. So just find a number which shows the sheer volume that you've done. When it comes to getting the exact number, let's say words written, articles written, if you don't know, guesstimate. It's better than nothing. Should I be descriptive while cold messaging or very short in my message content? This is my cold messaging process. Send a blank connection request. Thank them for the connection request and wish them a wonderful day. Smiley face. Then compliment something impressive they've done on their profile, genuinely, that you actually think is impressive. Like they've built something from scratch. They've got a big career move. Then ask them, about their goals for the rest of the year. That's my play. If it feels icky to ask for the goals for the end of the year, because maybe it doesn't feel right, then just ask them about that impressive thing. And then, or potentially just ask permission to ask that question. When you ask the question, ask it very clearly, they give you answer, and then you can say, great, give your own context, and it'd be love to get an informational interview out of it. It mean the world to me. If it's in the context of getting a job, that is how I would play it. If you send 100 connection requests a week, you probably get around 30 accept and about like 2 or 3 accept for a call, which is crazy because that's 12 calls a month, which is amazing. So don't take it personal if people don't reply. Not everyone's on the platform 24/7, but yeah, that is how I'd play it. When are you able to review and give feedback on resumes and portfolio website? Trying to get a full-time paying game design position. Would love to get insights from you. Alrighty. So I don't currently do it. I am closed on coaching. However, I can recommend Richard King. If you search for those 2 words, he gives amazing resume feedback, very affordable as well. I believe like $2 a minute. So it'd be $30 for a 15-minute review. And I've had him review mine and it's been amazing. So I'll start with Richard King, and then he probably knows someone who could review your portfolio website. So I would love, I'd suggest having a chat with Richard King. I missed the first part of the stream, so I'm not sure if you talked about it, but do you believe the game industry will improve soon in terms of hiring and entry-level applicants? It definitely won't get worse. Timing of when? Christina said 2025, mid, so that is a way away, 6 months. When I think practically, people are hiring entry-level applicants in like the co-development setting, so not working directly on the games, but working in support of the game sometimes. So definitely just remember that there's 2 machines in the games industry. You have the developers and the publishers who are doing it themselves and then leveraging outsourcing. Then you have outsourcing studios who sometimes leverage the cheapest talent possible, which would then be entry talent, to do work for the former. So if we can't get work here, I know people who get their first ever jobs in a company called like Iron Belly, for example, like outsourcing studios. So to actually get a sense of entry-level applicants, I would have a look at what's already out there just to get a feeler. And then if it feels like there's not enough, it's talk to people in the industry and get that sense check, because otherwise it's guessing. Go to conferences if there's any local to you. Some of them are relatively inexpensive. Like the ticket might be less than $50, and then you could share an Airbnb. So the whole thing could cost $100 to $200 if they're relatively local. And then just speak, ask those questions, and then that should give you a bit of a sense check. But it would be a guess for me. But there's more money coming into the industry. Some studios are sitting on a bunch of cash. It's just logistics of like, do we need to hire yet? So there's always a boom around this time, September, right after the summer holidays, and it's only 3 days after. So you should start to see more jobs now, but we'll see how many. When it comes to programming, how do you quantify things you've done in previous roles? Great question. So time saved and like features delivered very specifically. So if you've delivered a feature, that alone is cool. But if you can find out what that feature did for the game, if it's a live service game or a mobile game, that's very interesting. One thing that I did always in my blurbs when I was promoting a developer is have like hero stories. So I had one developer specifically who at Quali, he got given a refactor task, which was projected at 4 weeks or 4 to 2 months. So 1 to 2 months. And he did it in 1 week. That's an amazing story. And that's numbers. 8-week task, did it in 1 week because of boom, boom, boom. So when it comes to programming, you can use time, amount of features you delivered, and then the results of the feature, whether it be saving time if you've made a tool from artists, it could be making money or saving server costs. So money is another one. Could be making money, could be increasing users. You might have developed a feature which was played X amount of times. So you have time, players, money, all that good jazz. And just sheer number of code sometimes is useful. What does an effective mentor-mentee relationship look like? Great question. So in my opinion, if I'm looking at it from the mentor perspective, is someone who shows up on time, asks good questions, and not only asks good questions, actually implements and then comes back with feedbacks like, hey, this happened. What should I do next? Never rely on the mentor to get you the job. If they feel that from you, it won't make it a nice time, because then it feels like I have a new dependent, if that makes sense. So in my opinion, mentor-mentee relationship, you have the initial call, you see if you vibe first because it's a personal one, and then try to get the follow-up calls, whether it be monthly, quarterly. Pretty much anyone who likes you should agree to a quarterly meeting. And sometimes that's all you need. And then you can just keep async, because you've now got something in the diary. You have a relationship. So you have a reason to chat. Very much. Wendy, when is my next event? I'm actually going to announce it tomorrow, I believe. I'm having a great one. It's how to find money. How to find money in the games industry by a VC type character. So it is from Pontus Maller. So they close investment, merger and acquisition. So yeah, going straight to the top in terms of the problems that we're solving. But yeah, should be interesting. I'll announce that soon. So if you want to check any of this information, if you just follow me and ring the bell, then you shouldn't miss it. So I'm Harry Phokou. And also the Gaming Playbook podcast page that you see this, that's where the LinkedIn Lives are announced. And then the actual podcast that I do are on my page. And then obviously you can subscribe on whether it's Spotify, YouTube, or Apple Podcasts. I have an amazing mentor, but they are very, very busy. Any tips for helping reduce work on their part, but still get some of their valuable expertise? Good question. Okay. If they're very, very busy, could you get their time in terms of 15 minutes? 15 minutes is still a decent amount of time to get a lot of your questions answered. It's surprising because I've paid a lot for coaching this year, probably like $5 to $7 grand, something silly. And I get something out of everything. And there was one coaching I paid for, which was £750 a month for 2 months. And it was only 30 minutes a week. So when you look at the time split on that, it's quite expensive. But in that 30 minutes, I was always surprised about how many things we covered. So I would just check how much time am I asking for from the mentor? Could I reduce it to 15 minutes and see what happens? And just come with questions prepared and things to show the person. I'd also just be genuine and say, hey, like, I really appreciate your time. It'd be great to have 15 minutes. Is there anything I can do to reduce work on your part? Just ask me what you've asked me. You want to big up the mentor, because the mentor and everyone in the world loves to be bigged up, but then also, just genuinely ask. And if they say, look, I'm so sorry, I am very, very busy, but then at least you know. So I would ask for 15 minutes if you haven't already, and potentially voice notes. So I get a lot of my ghostwriting done based on voice notes. Even the busiest person in the world will have an opportunity to go for a walk and reply by voice note and give you like a 7 to 10 minute reply. So I have very, very busy CEOs give me 30 minutes worth of voice notes in a week, plus a bi-weekly call. Yes, I'm ghostwriting for them, but they have the time to send the voice notes because they know it's important. So if you ask for it in a voice note phone, that might also help. So those two options, 15-minute calls or voice note is what I would go for. Hopefully that is helpful. And yeah, big up what you just said there, JR. So mentors are one of the most OP things. Whenever someone tells me what to do when finding a job is find a mentor. It can be paid, it can be unpaid. Like step one, just pay someone like Richard King to review your CV if you haven't. $15. Super, super useful. And then once you've done that, you had context from someone who's seen loads of CVs, do the steps I took. Go to Amir Satvat's coaching page on his spreadsheet, go to his account, go to the spreadsheet, follow the steps, you will find it. And then there's loads of people who've been added recently. Just send them the nice connection request like, hey, saw you on the thing, would love to have 15 minutes of your time, XYZ. This is how I'm going to use it. And then try to get those calls. And then those calls, if you think about it from a sales perspective, I'm just trying to convert some of those into relationships. Also, remember, you're giving them the gift of being a mentee. So people who sign up to that, why are they doing that? Because they want to give back. And you're giving them the gift of the opportunity to give back to someone who's actually going to implement it. So yeah, super, super important to just get a mentor, basically. And yeah, 100%. Accountability partner is everything. So I went solo as a ghostwriter in April, but I was also a solo business developer contractor in this October of last year. And I would have been very, very sad and lonely if I hadn't had my online tribe. So I got that through e-coffees, just doing the thing that I've just said there, and also through paid communities. So I've joined a few LinkedIn ones, but yeah, just any communities you can join where you can have that accountability. Really, really helpful. What are do and don't in new profile? So I'm going to assume you're asking for help on your new profile. So number one, have a profile picture of your face. You cannot have the logo of your company because then I'm just going to assume you're not a real person. Just facts. Study in Framebox. Don't know what that means. So I'm just going to give you a full spicy roasting right now. So I'm looking at Akshay's profile. Welcome, art enthusiasts. Delighted to share my recent explanation. Freelance. But yeah, just more detail. Think about what a good artist profile looks like. So just search senior artist. Look at your favorite one. Okay, what do you like about that? Could be the way they put their portfolio. Could be the types of things they're posting. How clear the headline is. Yeah, real face, smiling and approachable. Someone else took the picture. Headline that says actually what you do. And then flesh out the freelance, like what have you actually done? So step ones for sure is those. You currently found mine. I want to make one for job seekers who love video games. Yeah, I'd say Amir has a nice Discord. So you could probably start there if you want to find some people to start with. Leverage communities that already exist. And on that note, I've lost my voice. So I will love you and leave you. Thank you everyone so much for joining. Still 30 people here, which has been a pleasure. So I will bid you all farewell and good night. So yeah, thank you very much. If you haven't already, scan that and you should get emails from me with recaps of the event. And thank you again. It's been an absolute pleasure. I heard that there's going to be a One Piece, which is going to be done with modern pacing. And that would be funny to watch. So maybe is the answer. I could do it when that new one comes out. But yeah, it's kind of like a meme that I haven't watched it and I have all this One Piece stuff. I went to Gamescom and bought this, but then I realized I don't know what to do with it. So it now sits on the radiator. But yeah, I just like the hat. It's a nice hat. Other than that, never seen an episode. I just know he has long arms. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. cheers. Thank you so much. And Giancarlo, thank you. Amazing. Okay, I will now actually leave. Goodbye, everyone.